Hello everyone and happy November. So, remember the 5th of November, the Gunpowder Plot, 5th of November 1605. Remember the 5th of November, the Gunpowder Treason and Plot. I know of no reason why the Gunpowder Treason should ever be forgot. Guy Fawkes, 'twas his intent to blow up the king and Parliament, 70 barrels of powder below, to prove old England's overthrow. By God's providence he was captured, with a dark lantern and burning match. Holla boys, let the bells ring. Holla boys, God save the king. And what should we do with him? Burn him. Also, kind of can be shortened to please to remember the 5th of November, Gunpowder, Treason and Plot. I see no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. That's kind of the shortened version of the Gunpowder Plot. Now, the Gunpowder Plot took place 5th of November 1605. Of course, it did actually start in 1604 because it started the night before. But in England, anyway, that's how it goes. So because of the Gunpowder Plot, which we're going to get into, don't worry. But what happened was, it became sort of one of those normal things to do, that the cellars of the Palace of Westminster would be searched by the Queen's Guards, now the King's Guards, of course. It's a custom searching the Palace of Westminster because it dates back to what happened during the night of the 4th of November 1605, when a man called Guy Fawkes was discovered in the building's cellars. He was hiding there with barrels of gunpowder, preparing to cause an explosion the very next day. Fawkes wanted to kill King James I at the opening of Parliament ceremony, but he was captured before any harm could come to the king. So, even though it's over 400 years, it's something today that we do still remember in England and we do still celebrate. Though that might seem a little strange, is how we celebrate it. Anyway, the origins of the Gunpowder Plot. The 13 men who were behind the Gunpowder Plot were followers of the Catholic Church. They wanted to practice their faith, without fear of persecution. But this was not possible in England in the early 1600s. Anyone found to be a Catholic, well, as you know, they would be heavily punished. Their property could be confiscated. They might be made to pay a fine, or they could even be sent to prison. Worst of all, a person could be sentenced to death just for being a Catholic. Unfortunately, that just was the way back then. Not now, of course, thankfully, but it was. Now, that changed during the reign of Henry, of course. When Henry became king in 1509, he was a Catholic, as were all Christians in the land. He accepted, without question, that the Pope, based in Rome, Italy, was the supreme head of the whole church. When Henry asked the Pope to grant him a divorce to his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, the scene was set for one of the biggest changes in English history. The Catholic Church did not allow a married couple to divorce each other. The Pope told Henry he had to stay married to Catherine. This was unacceptable to Henry, so he decided on a ruthless solution. What did he do? In 1533, he announced that his marriage to Catherine was over, and he broke away from the Pope and the Catholic Church. In 1534, Henry made himself head of the English Church. That's what he did, guys. That was Henry VIII, by the way, just so we know which Henry we are talking about, because there's been many kings, many Henrys, many this, many that, you know. Until Henry's death in 1547, the English Church still followed the teachings of the Catholic faith. The services were in Latin, and prayer books were printed in Latin, a language that most people could not understand. Under the next king, that was Edward, of course, the sixth, the move towards a new sort of church gained pace. The English Church and others elsewhere in Western Europe refused to accept the authority and teaching of the Catholic Church. These churches were part of a religious movement known as the Reformation. Its aim was to reform or change the way the church worked. People involved drew up notices called protests, in which they stated their beliefs. The churches that had broken away from the Catholic Church became known as Protestant churches, and the English Church was one of them. In 1549, Edward made the Catholic Mass completely illegal. The statue of the saints were removed from Catholic churches and paintings were whitewashed over. The church service was changed from Latin to English, and the first prayer book was printed in English. Now, that would have been the first ever one in English. These changes angered Catholics in England. Attempts were made to restore the Catholic faith, but they all failed. Then, under Elizabeth I, the process of return, begun by her father, Henry VIII, reached new heights. In 1559, an Act of Parliament established her as the supreme governor of the Church of England, and Catholics who refused to accept the monarch as head of the Church faced execution. Despite the danger, they continued to practice their religion in complete secret, which that's well known that they did. So that's why we get to Mr. Fawkes and his belief that the king must die. Queen Elizabeth I died in 1603, and a Scottish King James inherited the English throne. The Catholics in England were pleased that James was the new monarch because they knew he allowed people in Scotland to follow the Catholic faith. They hoped King James would protect English Catholics too, but it was not to be. King James wanted to have power over the church. He made this clear in January 1604 at the conference held at Hampton Court, a royal palace near London. At the conference, James said he would only rule the country if the church was under his control. And so it was that James, like Queen Elizabeth before him, persecuted English Catholics. He fined them for not going to church. It had to be the Church of England, any church services, and he had Catholic priests put to death. It was a frightening time for English Catholics. A few weeks after the Hampton Court reference, what he'd actually set forth and made, a meeting of a very different kind was held. This was May 1604. 5 Catholic men in secret at a house in London. Their leader was Robert Catesby. With him were Thomas Percy, Thomas Winter, and John Wright, and Guy Fawkes. Catesby had brought these men together to discuss one thing: how to kill King James and leaders of the government. He wanted their deaths to start an uprising in which Catholics would seize power and return England to being its once beautiful Catholic nation. So, Catesby's plan was this: he wanted to blow up the House of Parliament with gunpowder on the day of the state opening, when King James and the countries, politicians would be there. To the plotters, this violent act was seen as a means of self-defence, a way of ending the years of suffering for Catholics in England. But who were these men who dared to risk their lives for what they believed in? Robert Catesby came from a wealthy Catholic family. As a boy, he had seen his father drown, and thrown into prison just for his Catholic faith. Perhaps this had made him the man that he was. Seeing that would be quite traumatic. When it says drown as well, it means dunk in, like they did with the witches. That's what it does. Maybe it made him someone who was determined to take the law into his own hands. He was a born leader and was able to persuade others to join him in the plot to kill the king. Catesby recruited his cousin, Thomas Winter, and his friend John Wright, and Thomas Percy. The fifth plotter was a soldier, a tall, powerfully built man with thick reddish-brown hair, a moustache, and a bushy beard. He was Guy Fawkes. Born in York to Protestant parents, Fawkes had become a Catholic while at school. This was because he had Catholic friends, and he sympathised with them, admiring the way they stood up to their beliefs. In the early 20s, he joined the Catholic army of King Philip of Spain, and for 7 years fought against Protestants in the Low Countries, present-day Holland and Belgium. Fawkes became an expert in the use of gunpowder, and it was this skill that Catesby needed if the plan was to succeed. Well, of course he would need that skill. It's gunpowder, right? Why wouldn't it? So, what did they do? Well, after the secret meeting, and they put all the plan into place. The meeting was in May 1604, remember. Catesby and the others, they set to work. And at the end of May, Thomas Percy rented a house near to the Parliament building. It was to be the plotters' headquarters. Percy pretended to be a wealthy gentleman, moved in with Guy Fawkes, who pretended to be his servant. Fawkes did not use his own name. Instead, he called himself John Johnson. Oh, dear me. The house had a cellar, and the plan was for the plotters to dig a tunnel from it towards the House of Lords, the part of the Parliament building in which King James would be. On state opening day, Parliament was not due to open until the 7th of February 1605, which gave the plotters plenty of time. During the months that followed, Robert Keyes joined the group, and arrangements were made to start work on the tunnel. Tools and timber posts for supporting its walls, and roof was secretly taken to the house. Early in December 1604, the tunnel was begun. By Christmas Eve, it had reached the foundation walls of the House of Lords, which were 3 metres thick. At about the same time As the tunnellers were chipping through the stone foundations, it was announced that Parliament would not open until the 29th of September 1605. King James would not be in the building for another 9 whole months. And they'd worked so hard at digging too. Well, it gave them more time to get through the thick walls, I suppose, right? After taking a few days off for Christmas, the plotters carried on with their tunnelling. A seventh man, Christopher Wright, the younger brother of John Wright, joined them. He helped with the hard work of breaking through the foundations. Then in February 1605, gunpowder packed into 36 wooden barrels were rowed across the River Thames, carefully stored inside the plotter's house. To get this far had cost a lot of money. Robert Catesby had paid for everything, from the rent of the house to the food his men had ate. Now, though, he was running out of money, and he established the support of John Grant to help him pay for the work. At the same time, Robert Winter, the brother of Thomas Winter, joined the team, as did Catesby's servant, Thomas Bates. An 11th man, and that was Ambrose Rookwood, was also recruited. His horses were to be used by the plotters in their escape from London. By March 1605, the plotters had bored through the foundation wall. When noises were heard coming from and above, the plotters knew they were close to the House of Lords. Fawkes went to investigate the noises, and he returned with the news that they were coming from a cellar used to store coal. Above the cellar was the very hall where King James would be, where he would indeed open up Parliament. This was getting risky. Had the plotters known about the cellar earlier, there would have been no need for them to dig the tunnel. It happened that the coal merchant who used the cellar was moving out, and so Thomas Percy arranged to rent it. He said he wanted to store firewood there or fuel for winter. In the last week of March 1605, the barrels of gunpowder were moved into the cellar. Fawkes covered them over with bundles of firewood, making sure they were completely out of sight. The barrels contained around 2,500 kilograms of gunpowder, about 5 times the amount needed to demolish the building. The trap was set. It was dangerous for the plotters to stay in London, so they scattered. Fawkes returned to the Low Countries. Catesby and Percy, well, they went to the city of Bath. The others went to their homes, waiting for state opening day to finally arrive. Catesby used the time to rally more support, and he recruited 2 more men to join him, Sir Everard Digby and Francis Tresham. There were now 13 men involved in the plot of King James's death. Also, they thought, anyway, they had planned to kill him, remember. Now, 10 days before Parliament was due to open, a mysterious letter was delivered to Lord Monteagle, or that was a Catholic lord. The letter was not signed. It warned Lord Monteagle not to attend the state opening ceremony. It said Parliament would receive a terrible blow on that day. Lord Montague gave the letter to Robert Cecil, the Secretary of State, who showed it to King James. Oh dear. News of this letter reached the plotters. At first they thought one of their own men, Francis Tresham, had betrayed them. Tresham convinced the others he had not sent the letter. When the coal cellar was not searched, they thought the plot was still quite the secret. It was decided to carry on, and Fawkes took up position in the cellar, ready to set light to the gunpowder, ready to light the trail that would ignite the barrels that would cause the explosion. However, unknown to the plotters, and because he was worried after learning about the letter to Lord Montague, King James had issued orders that a search be made of the building on the 4th of November, the day before his arrival there. And so, as midnight approached, Sir Thomas Knivet and a group of guards entered the cellar, where they found Guy Fawkes dressed in riding clothes as if about to leave in a hurry. It all seemed very suspicious to the king's men, who, on moving the bundles of firewood, discovered the gunpowder Fawkes had placed there, and he was searched and found to be carrying matches. When asked who he was, he gave the false name of John Johnson. Fawkes was arrested and was taken away to be questioned. Of course he was. We're going to let him go, were they? Immediately after his arrest, Fawkes was taken to King James, who asked, "Why would you have fired that gunpowder?" And he replied, "To blow up the Scottish beggars back to their native mountains." Fawkes was sent to the Tower of London, where, over the course of the next 3 days, he was tortured, possibly by being stretched on a rack until his arms and legs were pulled out of their sockets. On the 7th of November, he would stand the pain no more, and confessed. He told his torturers who he really was, and that there were only 4 others involved in the plot. The other plotters had fled from London as soon as they found out that Fawkes had been arrested. The search was soon on to track them down. The trial led to the Holbeck House near the village of Walheath, Staffordshire. It was the home of the Littleton family, who were Catholics. The plotters sheltered there, but on the 8th of November the house was surrounded by the king's men. In the fight that followed, Robert Catesby, Thomas Percy, John and Christopher Wright were shot dead. The other plotters escaped, but they too were tracked down and arrested, and so were many other Catholics suspected of helping them. All of the men were sent to the Tower of London, where they were tortured. Francis Tresham died while he was in the tower. The 8 surviving plotters were tried for high treason on the 27th of January 1606. Despite saying they were innocent of any crimes, all were found guilty and sentenced to death. 3 days later, Sir Everard Digby, Robert Winter, John Grant, Thomas Bates were executed in St. Paul's Churchyard, London. The next day, 31st of January, Thomas Winter, Ambrose Rookwood, Robert Keyes, and Guy Fawkes were executed. They died in the old palace yard at Westminster, close to the Parliament building they had wanted to blow up. All 8 men were hanged until almost dead. Then cut down from the gallows, disembowelled, beheaded, then cut into quarters. This was how traitors were executed. The bodies of the 4 men who had died at Holbeck House were taken from the graves, and their hands were cut off and sent to London. The severed heads and other body parts, well, They were impaled on spikes and displayed for all to see at various places in London. It was a grisly sight, designed to show that the plotters had died and that the same fate would await anyone who dared to harm the king. Soon after the executions of the plotters, the government ruled the 5th of November should be the day of Thanksgiving. Ever since then, the day has been known as Bonfire Night or Guy Fawkes Day. It is a time when effigies of Guy Fawkes, known as Guys, are burned on bonfires all over Britain. The gunpowder plot had been thwarted, but it is not forgotten, and it will never be forgotten. So let's look at the timeline and break it down. 1603, the 24th of March, James, obviously of Scotland, became James I, King of England. This is 1604. 14th, 16th and 18th of January, Hampton Court Conference, Catholics are still to be prosecuted. 1604, the 22nd of February, Catholic priests are ordered out of England. 1604, May, 5 plotters take an oath to blow up Parliament and kill King James. 1604, the 26th of May, the plotters rent a house next to the House of Lords. 1604, 11th of December, the plotters begin digging a tunnel towards the House of Lords. 1605, 18th of January, after stopping for Christmas, work continues on the tunnel. 1605, March, the plotters rent a coal cellar under the House of Lords. They stop digging the tunnel. 1605, 26th of October, Lord Montague receives an anonymous letter warning him not to attend the state opening of Parliament. 1605, 4th of November, Guy Fawkes is discovered in the coal cellar and is arrested. 1605, 5th of November, the rest of the plotters flee London. 1605, the 8th of November, at Holbeck House, Staffordshire, a gunfight happens with 4 of the plotters, Percy, John and Christopher Wright, Catesby. They were shot dead. 1606, 27th of January, the surviving plotters are all put on trial. 1606, 30th of January, Digby, Robert, Winter, Grant and Bates are executed. 1606, 31st of January, Thomas Winter, Rookwood, Keyes and Fawkes are executed. And that's the timeline for the gunpowder plot of England. And that is why we have Bonfire Night, and that is why you see fireworks on the 5th of November in England. This is the whole reason, because they figured, why not celebrate the gunpowder plot by giving people mini gunpowder things that they can light themselves? Seems like a really good idea. I just find that so ironic, guys. Think about it. This guy was going to kill the king with gunpowder. The way that we celebrate it now, we sell fireworks to people of England so they can light them and set them off into the air. Technically, that's gunpowder. So, yeah. But we do also have bonfires where we burn a pretend Guy Fawkes on the fire. So, yeah, that's why I don't really celebrate Bonfire Night, the 5th of November, because to me it's extremely ironic how they sell small gunpowder things for people to light at home and set off when that's what nearly killed the king. And I don't get it. Anyway, as we've gone through this, you will notice on the pictures, those are actual pictures. The signature of Guy Fawkes is before he was tortured and after he was tortured, and you'll see what he signed and such. But the pictures are actual pictures, yeah. So thank you for listening to this, I guess, special episode, because I won't be doing it again. It'll only be done this once. Many blessings.